If you've ever walked down the bustle-filled streets of Aubard at dusk, you might remember a particular aroma that crept through the air each Saturday evening, a rich, smoky scent of beans mingled with ripe, sweet plantain. There was a comfort to it, a hint of home and hope, like a gentle embrace in the chaos of city life. That aroma belonged to Auntie Grace Adiguk, a woman whose kindness was whispered through the walls of every flat nearby, whose gentle laughter was a balm for tired souls. To the children, she was more than a neighbor. She was the mother they wished for, spoiling them with treats and stories, tending scraped knees with the same care she showed when she stirred her legendary beans on the fire. Her skin glowed warm and deep under the fading sun. Her hands moved with careful, loving intention. People in the compound adored her for her patience, her gentle voice that never rose in anger, her willingness to share even the smallest joy. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? But all those smiles hid secrets. If you'd lingered long enough in her kitchen, you might have seen it in her eyes. A quiet sadness, blooming each time she smiled a little too hard. Every time laughter faded. 14 years of marriage to Conall Adigok. 14 years of longing, of prayers, and silent tears. She had hoped, month after month, that her womb would bloom with life, that the emptiness she carried would be filled with giggles and midnight cries. Hospitals, doctors, endless appointments. The cycle repeated. Some nights, she climbed the rocky paths of distant hills to pray, breaking her fast until her lips bled, and still nothing. Sometimes hope would dare rise in her heart, only to come crashing down with every new disappointment. Through all this, Conall loved her. Yet the hush between them had stretched out, thick as fog, heavy with words unsaid. He would stare at the wall for hours, as if waiting for some miracle to crack the silence. People whispered, but Grace held her head high, her faith shaken yet unbroken. She could still laugh with the children, still dish out her beans, still wish on the scent of Saturday evening. One day, change arrived with thunder. It started as gossip, then urgency. A neighbor burst into Grace's flat, her excitement spilling everywhere. "Have you heard of Mommy anointing overflow?" she almost sang. A prophetess with power to tear open silent wombs. People say her prayers work almost instantly. Grace wanted to dismiss it as another rumor. But when she watched those viral church videos, women doubled over in ecstasy, testifying miracles, doubt trembled inside her. That one particular Sunday, the skies grew so dark that even the birds refused to sing. Heavy clouds prowled above like an omen. Thunder cracked open the morning, making the window panes shiver. As Grace tied her scarf over her braided hair, her cream-colored gown hugging her hopeful body, Conall hesitated by the doorway, umbrella in hand. "Are you sure you want to go out there, love?" "Even the rain is angry today," Grace answered softly. "I have nothing left to lose." They walked together into the brewing storm, side by side, hearts pounding with uncertainty. Every step closer to the sanctuary of the living mantle, Abard's largest church, made Grace feel both weightless and terrified, as if something monumental was perched on the edge of her fate. At the church gates, the crowd surged with desperation. People pushed past puddles, holding chairs above their heads, desperate to shield their faith from the rain. It was chaos and hope tangled together. Inside, the sanctuary was massive, floor gleaming white, glass pulpit rising like a temple, enormous screens pulsing with phrases, miracle and fruitfulness service, healing for the hopeless. The choir lifted their voices so powerfully it shook the air. There is power in the name of Jesus, echoed everywhere. Some danced, others rolled on the marble floor, some uttered strange tongues. Grace stood still in the torrent, hands clenched, lips praying in a whisper, "Please, God, hear me now." All at once, Grace saw her, the prophetess herself. Deborah Olawani was a vision of mystery and command, tall and graceful, wrapped in green flowing robes that shimmered under the church lights. Her face was smooth, almost ageless, eyes piercing, sharp enough to slice through pretense, but hinting at a depth no one could fathom. She wore gloves that reached past her elbows, defiant to the heat that pressed down on every worshiper. When Deborah lifted the microphone, the raucous hall stilled in an instant. She didn't have to shout. Her voice was deep, tranquil, yet there was something in its quietness that bent hearts, demanded attention. Today, she declared, God is walking into wombs. He is spinning shame into testimony. If you have waited, run, sprint to the altar. The announcement split through the crowd like lightning. Women flooded to the altar, some crawling, some weeping, some raising photos of lost children or vanished husbands, like proof their suffering deserved miracle. Grace stood frozen, knees like stone, heart thumping so violently she thought it might shatter her. Suddenly, Deborah's voice grew louder, focused, like it was meant just for her. You, woman in the cream gown, come now. I've been waiting for you. The entire church turned as though the walls themselves whispered Grace's name. Connell pressed her forward gently. You've come this far. Don't turn back, he murmured. Trembling, Grace inched toward the altar, eyes swimming with tears. She fell on her knees, whispering into the microphone, "Please help me. I can't carry this pain anymore." Deborah knelt beside her, robes brushing over cold tiles, placed her gloved hand on Grace's forehead. Deborah closed her eyes and uttered words that rang out in a language powerfully unfamiliar. "Spirit of barrenness, pack your load and go," she commanded. Grace did not expect what came next. Her body arched, her arms flailed, mouth stretching open in a silent, primal scream. For one endless moment, no sound escaped, only a tremor that quaked through the crowd. Then stillness. An eerie silence settled over the sanctuary, as if time paused. Deborah leaned close, her lips nearly touching Grace's ear, whispered words that made Grace shudder. When Deborah stood, both hands reaching up, she announced with a voice that carried through the hall and out into the street, "She is pregnant." What followed was pure, unfiltered chaos. People screamed, cried, rejoiced. Women ran to the front. Men clapped wildly. Ushers rushed forward to wrap Grace in white cloth as she lay shaking on the floor. Connell collapsed beside her, his laugh choked with sobs, hands clutching his head. Grace sat up slowly, the tears falling freely now, looking through the haze at the man who never left her side. He whispered, voice trembling, "Did you hear, Grace? You're going to be a mother." She tried to speak, but all that came were more tears. From the pulpit, Prophetess Deborah watched, hands raised, eyes glowing, almost in triumph. Outside, the rain battered down, but inside the sanctuary, it felt as if sunbeams had finally broken through the clouds. The choir struck up a new song. "My case is different. My womb is open." The refrain grew, 100 voices bearing Grace upward toward hope. Grace stayed by the altar, resting her head on Connell's shoulder, heart swelling with emotions she had long denied herself. The first fragile piece of hope in 14 years. That night, as she returned home, she felt light, almost buoyant, as though the pain of endless waiting had at last loosened its iron grip. Yet, as the celebration faded, a chill threaded through her spirit, whispering warnings she could not decipher. At dawn, Grace woke before sunrise, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands placed gently over her stomach. She stared down, wondering, was something growing inside her now? Her skin looked brighter in the morning light, eyes reflecting an energy she had not seen in years. Connell, still asleep in the tangled sheets beside her, stirred and sat up. "You're awake already?" Grace smiled. "I couldn't sleep. I keep hearing her voice. You are pregnant." Connell nodded, as if afraid to break the spell. "I heard it too, Grace. We all did. The whole church witnessed." She nodded back. "It feels real inside me." He suggested, "Let's see the hospital this week, just in case." Even if the doctors found nothing, Connell's faith had grown. But underneath all this, Grace sensed another presence, a shadow that danced behind her newfound hope. As the sun climbed, the news traveled swiftly. The woman, barren for 14 years, was now a testimony. Miracles were whispered in every shop, every market, every WhatsApp group. The church posted her deliverance from waiting room to miracle womb, and 12,000 views appeared overnight. People commented, prayed. Some even came to her house with songs and gifts. Grace was overwhelmed, but grateful, letting her tears mix freely with the prayers and praises that followed in waves. In the days that followed, a lodestar of anticipation hovered over Grace's every waking moment. Where once there had been emptiness, now hope pressed in from all sides, sometimes gentle, sometimes crushing. Neighbors stopped her in the corridors to offer congratulations, often laying their hands upon her shoulder or stomach, as if to catch some of the miracle for themselves. Aunties arrived with herbal teas and whispered traditional blessings in Yoruba, faces solemn with awe. Local pastors stopped by, quoting ancient scriptures about Sarah and Hannah, promising that her story was just beginning. Connell, too, walked with a new spring in his step, wearing his joy like a new suit, crisp, careful. He began to behave differently, cooking breakfast for Grace, humming hymns he hadn't sung since childhood. At work, his colleagues slapped him on the back, toasting him with bottles of malt and promising to attend the naming ceremony. Every sign was dissected, every bout of nausea, every flutter in Grace's belly, and everyone around her seemed to have an opinion. For Grace, these first days of expectation were a giddy, spinning whirl, making her dizzy with mingled fear and happiness. But the weight of being everyone's miracle soon became heavy. Grace found herself performing faith, smiling when she wanted to weep, comforting others who were still waiting, forgetting her own doubts and fears. She could not disappoint them or herself. She tried desperately to believe in her miracle as fiercely as they did, even as anxiety curled up inside her, whispering, "What if it's all a lie? What if the prophetess spoke too soon?" Behind closed doors, Grace's doubts grew like thick vines, twisting around her chest at night as she lay awake. She feared to speak her worries aloud, afraid they might undo the magic granted to her. Connell noticed her silence, her withdrawn glances, but chose optimism, wrapping her in gentle reassurances. "God has done it, my love. Have faith. Remember what the prophetess said. She is never wrong." Grace would nod, willing herself to agree, even as her hands pressed against her abdomen for some sign, some undeniable proof. In the bustling world outside, the spotlight grew more intense. The church asked her to share her story at midweek services. The video of her deliverance was played again and again, worshipers raising hands in praise each time her face appeared on the big screen. Children gathered outside her windows to catch a glimpse, believing her house to be sacred now. Strangers knocked on the door, asking for prayers, blessings, tokens of faith. Grace began to feel both honored and encaged. The miracle child, whose progress was scrutinized, whose every move was discussed in WhatsApp threads and after-church conversations. She lost herself sometimes, not knowing if she was living for herself or for the believers who surrounded her. And on nights when the crowds were gone and the house was quiet, the realization would return, whisper soft and dangerous. Her life had ceased to be her own. The day finally arrived for Grace's long-awaited hospital checkup. She and Connell dressed in their finest, the occasion dignified and holy, like a pilgrimage. The hospital was abuzz, filled with familiar faces who now greeted them with giddy excitement, holding her arms like she might shatter under their touch. "Congratulations, Grace," the nurses exclaimed. The matron herself, a stern woman who'd watched Grace struggle for years, met her at the entrance with a rare, quiet smile. The exam room was warm, the lights bright. Dr. Afolabi, who had managed her case all this time, arrived with the file in her hand and a twinkle of hope glimmering in her eyes. After the usual pleasantries, Grace lay down, heart drumming hard beneath her chest, as the gel was spread and the ultrasound began. The room hushed, filled only with the gentle hum of machines and Grace's shallow breaths. Connell pressed her hand, eyes shut tight in prayer. Seconds ticked by, longer than they should. The doctor's brow furrowed and her lips grew thin. Silence thickened the air, and Grace's hope began to wilt. At last, Dr. Maybe found. Afolabi spoke. Her voice was soft, but the words were sharp. Grace, I am so sorry, but I can't see any sign of pregnancy. Not right now. It's possible it's too early, but let's wait a few weeks and check again. The words slid through Grace like icy water. Connell looked away, jaw clenched, mouth set in a thin line. Grace pulled her dress back down, eyes burning with unshed tears, chest hollow. She nodded, mechanical, as reassurance tumbled from the lips of doctor and nurse alike. By the time they stepped out into the bright sun, the world felt louder and harsher, as if every living thing had turned its light on her private grief. Back at home, the news spread with ruthless speed. Word left the hospital and rippled through the compound. Then the church, the marketplaces, even the WhatsApp groups that had once celebrated her. Speculation took root. Some believed perhaps the miracle lay hidden, only waiting for another test. Others, more cynical, murmured of delusion, deception, or disappointment. Grace stayed indoors, fighting to keep hope alive. The voices outside were overwhelming. Encouragement mixing with skepticism, some urging her to continue believing, others advising caution, even silence. The phone rang with friends and strangers alike, some offering prayers, others fishing for details. Each call left her more exhausted. Connell struggled too. He no longer hummed, spending long evenings pacing their flat, wrestling with disappointment. He could not speak aloud. The hope that had filled their home now pressed in like a closing door. Even in the privacy of night, neither of them could say the words that burned in their hearts. What if it's never going to happen? Yet each time Connell saw the glimmer of pain in Grace's eyes, he forced hope into his words. We must believe, Grace. Isn't that what we've always done? Weeks dragged into months. No pregnancy was found. No flutter in Grace's belly. No swelling to reassure the watching world. Not even a faint shadow on the scan. Grace slipped into a haze of resignation, at times numb, occasionally swept by fierce resentment. The miracle she craved and the hope she'd inspired in others became a burden too heavy to bear. But in the heart of every difficult night, her mind drifted back to the sanctuary, to Prophetess Deborah's voice, echoing with the certainty of someone speaking for God. On a day thick with humidity, Grace decided to return to the place where everything had begun. The church was quieter this time, a weekday. No crowds, only a few staffers, arranging chairs or sweeping marble floors. She waited for hours, nerves jangling, until finally Prophetess Deborah emerged from her office, robes flowing, eyes ancient and kind. Deborah smiled knowingly, inviting Grace inside. "Ah, Grace, I have been expecting you." The words made Grace shiver. Inside the small, incense-scented office, Grace poured out her story. Her doubts, pain, the mercy and misery of hope, the pressure of expectation, the cruelty of disbelief. Deborah listened, not interrupting, eyes soft with understanding. When Grace was spent, the prophetess spoke with quiet authority. "Miracles do not always appear in the ways we expect, child. Sometimes healing is faith itself, the ability to hope again, to rebuild after disappointment." She placed her hand over Grace's heart, murmuring a new prayer, not for a child, but for peace. Grace left, still grieving, but lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally been shifted. Grace found that though her heart was lighter after the prophetess's gentle counsel, the world around her had not grown any quieter. News of her return to the church ricocheted through the compound and beyond, spawning a new wave of curiosity. Some neighbors took it as a sign of renewed faith, whispering among themselves that a second miracle must be on the way. Others clucked their tongues, skeptical of so much visible hope after so many years of silent suffering. In the outdoor market, where Grace once walked freely and unremarkably, vendors now greeted her with calculated warmth, trying to read the progress or regression of her story in her every expression. On Saturday, a group of elders from her village paid an unexpected visit. 5 dignified women wrapped in bold Ankara fabrics, faces creased with concern and the wisdom of long memory. They carried a basket filled with fruits, yam, and a bottle of palm oil, offerings meant to fortify the body and the soul. They sat in Grace's living room, accepting hibiscus tea, while Connell hovered nearby, uncertain whether to join them or give them space. "Child," said Malaraba, the eldest, her voice as smooth as river stones, "there are journeys whose meaning is hidden even from those who travel them." Another continued, "Your strength, your endurance, they have spoken to more women than you know, even if a child does not come." There were stories shared of long-ago trials, prayers at ancestral shrines, moments of breaking and rebuilding. For the first time, Grace realized that her pain was echoed in the lives of many, woven into the fabric of her community's history, rather than an isolated misery. Though the visit lasted only a few hours, the warmth lingered. "There are many ways to mother," the women reminded her upon leaving, "and compassion may be the greatest inheritance of all." As Grace slowly re-engaged with life, now seeing her own journey reflected in the lives and legends of those around her, Connell's struggle deepened. The attention that once gave him pride became painful, suffocating. Conversations with friends and family felt less like praise and more like reminders of failure. At work, casual jokes and innocent questions about when the baby would come now stung. At home, his silence thickened, his footsteps growing heavier by the day. One evening, long after Grace had drifted to sleep, Connell slipped outside to the courtyard. The same courtyard where her beans once filled the air with laughter and belonging. Alone, with only a chorus of distant crickets and the pale moonlight to witness him, he let his tears fall, raw and free. He thought back to their wedding day, Grace's bright smile framed by white lace. They had promised each other the world. When had that world grown so small, narrowing to the confines of their shared longing? Connell spent that night remembering all the times he had asked God, quietly, fervently, sometimes even angrily, what lesson lay hidden in this wilderness of waiting. He longed to be enough for Grace, to offer her joy, even when hope faltered. The next morning, weary but steadier, he resolved never to let the burden of disappointment become the only thing they shared. With gentle hands, he began, once again, to build small joys: fresh mango slices for breakfast, a shared walk under jacaranda trees, reminders of the life that could be lived even while waiting. The seasons shifted, bringing warm rains and fields thick with green. Grace found herself transforming as the natural world did. At first, it was only a matter of survival. She forced herself to cook again, to visit friends, to laugh even when the sound felt foreign in her mouth. But slowly, the effort gave way to something more honest. She enrolled in a class for storytelling at the local library, drawing young women and mothers-to-be around her in a circle every Thursday afternoon. She told tales not just of miracles and victories, but also of pain, waiting, trying, failing, and finding beauty in persistence. To her surprise, young women lingered after, grateful for a space where every feeling, hope, frustration, confusion, even envy, could be named and honored. "You are not alone," she told them, voice warm and steady. "You write your own miracles. Every day you survive your longing." One evening after class, a teenager approached, shy and quiet, revealing she too had been marked by loss, by the pressure to be perfect, to become someone else's dream. Together, they walked home in the gentle dusk, sharing hopes for the future. As Grace listened, she realized that the prophetess was right. Healing often arrived not with the fulfillment of an old dream, but with the creation of something new: purpose, connection, healing, multiplied by being shared. With her world slowly expanding once more, Grace found herself drawn back to her Saturday tradition. At first, she was nervous. Would people expect her beans to taste miraculous? Would her laughter sound forced, haunted by the ghosts of her story's twists and turns? But on the first Saturday, she returned to her post by the charcoal stove, the familiar scent of beans and plantain rising into the air. Neighbors emerged one by one. Mrs. Efwa, with her irrepressible sons, Salma, clutching her toddler. Even the night watchman, who claimed her beans, kept him alert through the long hours. There was no talk of miracles, only talk of daily life. Whose son had passed his exams, whose shop was struggling, who remembered which neighbor's birthday was coming soon. Grace watched the children devour her food, saw the adults lean in close to swap jokes and worries, and felt, for the first time in many years, a sense of pure belonging unshadowed by longing. It struck her how much her story and the hope it embodied had become woven into the collective life of her community. Her suffering had never been wasted. In bearing it honestly and bravely, she had given others permission to hope, to grieve, to try again. When the last plate was served and the laughter faded into the night, Grace lingered by the stove, her heart warm and at last content. For the bean pot might be empty, but her spirit was full. Once, Connell and Grace had counted days by test results and cycle calendars, marking hope and disappointment in red ink on a worn notepad. Now, following their separate but parallel journeys, they began building new rituals, smaller markers of togetherness that did not depend on a miracle. Some evenings, they read aloud, history books, poetry, even jokes from old magazines, savoring the quiet pleasure of shared stories. Other times, they strolled arm in arm through the open-air market, hunting for ripest fruit or the best deals, laughing with the vendors who winked at their easy familiarity. Weekends were set aside for their shared garden plot, where they planted leafy greens and peppers, Connell teasing that at least these seeds knew how to sprout. Each of these rituals, each meal, each walk, even each quiet moment in the dusk, became sacred in their gentle, ordinary way. Lessons bloom. They celebrated birthdays with more enthusiasm, attended friends' naming ceremonies without bitterness, and learned, slowly, to cherish not only what they hoped would come, but all they already possessed. Love had not erased their longing, but it had infused their waiting with meaning. Not the meaning of arrival, but the meaning of resilience, patience, and grace. Even as Connell and Grace found new joys in the rhythms of daily life, shadows from the past sometimes crept in. There were nights, rare but persistent, when Grace would wake from dreams heavy with longing or fear that something had been lost she could never regain. In those moments, all the reassurances and new rituals seemed fragile, like glass balanced atop a trembling table. But Grace had changed. Where once she would have wept in silence, now she reached for Connell, pressing her face into his shoulder, allowing herself to be comforted. She had learned not to judge the ache, or to be ashamed when grief startled her, as sharp and fresh as ever. Connell, too, found ways to confess his hidden sadness, no longer feeling that he must always be strong. Together, they lit candles on their windowsill and prayed, not just for a child, but for courage, for peace, and for the wisdom to find meaning in whatever days remain to them. The community, ever watchful and kind, respected this new privacy. Neighbors grew careful not to prod with questions, and the circle of Thursday storytellers became a shield as much as a support, keeping Grace tender but unexposed. The balance of hope and acceptance was delicate, but stronger with each passing week. As the years circled on, Grace and Connell became elders of a sort, pillars in their bustling neighborhood. Couples with griefs of their own came to them, seeking advice or simply a quiet place to speak their hearts. Young couples, often feeling pressured to meet expectations, sat on their humble porch on cool evenings, welcomed by the warmth of Grace's laughter or by Connell's sage, often wry counsel. One afternoon, a neighbor named Miriam, in tears over her own years of fruitless trying, arrived unannounced. Grace made room for her beside the stove, feeding her spoonfuls of spicy stew between gentle words. "I know," Grace whispered. "I know what it's like to wait for something so deeply it aches to breathe. But you can live and laugh anyway. There is more than one way to be whole." Connell listened from the doorway, his presence steady as earth, then joined Grace and Miriam as the sun dipped low, sealing the moment with quiet strength. These simple acts, giving comfort, sharing wisdom, offering a safe space for pain, became the legacy Grace and Connell never expected. Many in their community flourished, inspired not just by tales of miracles, but by the tangible grace of ordinary survival. The open hand, the listening ear, the meal offered without condition. Their story was now a living one, shaping, comforting, teaching others. It was nearing the end of the rainy season when Prophetess Deborah returned to Aberd on a rare visit. The church, flush with anticipation, buzzed over her presence, recalling her past miracles and the stories of healing she'd left in her wake. Grace, invited to a private reception, came not as a supplicant, but as a friend, her soul steadied by all she had learned. The moment Deborah entered, her green robes flowing with signature dignity, she noticed Grace in the crowd and smiled deeply. Later, seated together in a quieter corner, the prophetess clasped Grace's hands in her gloved ones, studying her face without words, letting the silence speak their shared knowledge. At last, Deborah spoke. "Are you well, child? Has peace found you?" Grace nodded, genuine joy in her eyes as she replied, "It has. Not as I expected, but as I needed." Deborah's laughter filled the room, warm and approving. "That is the deeper miracle," she said. To embrace what comes and to keep faith alive, not only for yourself, but for all who will follow behind. They prayed together, this time not for a child, but for continued strength, for their community, for all the women and families walking different roads toward healing. It was a closing of the circle and a gentle opening to whatever future the world held. On the 7th anniversary of that unforgettable Saturday service, Connell proposed a gathering, neither quite a party nor a solemn event, but something in between, a feast to honor life, love, and the beauty of endurance. Word went out across Aberd and beyond. Women from many neighborhoods arrived with plates of jollof rice, roasted chicken, and mountains of the sweet fried plantains for which Grace was famed. Grace stood at the center of the laughter and music, her eyes alight with contentment as children, some born in the years after her miracle, others still just hopeful dreams, danced around her skirts. Connell was never far off, wielding the grill and telling stories that made even the most stoic uncle break into a smile. Toasts were raised to the power of belief, to the wisdom of waiting, to the strength of a community that carries one another on their weakest days. Some of the women who had gathered on that first anxious morning now held babies on their hips, exchanging glances that meant, "I remember, I see you, I am with you." As dusk stained the sky purple and gold, a choir began to sing. Not the fervent anthem of miracles past, but a gentler song of hope found in unexpected places, of hearts made whole through kindness. As the moon rose over Abard and the final embers of the feast glowed in the night air, Connell and Grace stood side by side, exhausted but happy, looking around at the faces, some new, some so familiar they felt carved from memory. Grace realized she no longer dreamed only in terms of absence. She saw what she had, the unbreakable bond with Connell, the family they had created from friends and neighbors, the joy and laughter rising from their small home like an answered prayer. Her story, once marked by longing and desperation, had become a mosaic, 100 smaller miracles stitched together by courage, compassion, and the shared journey of so many others. When children gathered at her feet on Sunday afternoons to hear her tell stories, she did not hesitate to speak the truth, that life is full of unexpected turns, that wholeness does not always wear the face we imagine, and that even great sorrow can be transformed by love. Connell squeezed her hand as the last guests drifted away. "Look how far we've come," he whispered. Grace smiled into the bright, vast night. "Yes. And we're still going." The aroma of her beans lingered on the breeze, a reminder that every ending begets a new beginning, a never-ending circle of hope, faith, and the power to find joy on the untraveled roads.